how valuable this session was for you. So without further ado, I do want to stop sharing my screen and really welcome Jennifer today. Jennifer is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and organizational anthropologist who brings joy, and my screen went away. Jennifer brings joy and intention to organizational culture and leadership practice. She builds teams and systems designed to get results and help people thrive. Jennifer lives in Olympia on traditional lands of the Nisqually people, now home to the Hari family, amazing humans, dogs, horses, goats, and chickens who have taught her to apply her talents while always in learning mode. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, about those animals, if you hear anything in the background, now you know why that is. So without further ado, I am going to turn my video off to allow for broadband here. So let me do that. And I want to, first of all, say I'm so grateful to all of you that you've decided to join us today to talk about engagement strategies. As Sam said, I'm Jennifer Hari. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. I'm a practicing organizational anthropologist, which is a fancy and multi-syllable way of saying I basically help teams build the future they want to lean into. And many times creating or maintaining a culture of continuous improvement is what that team is seeing for their future. I have done work across some of the most interesting industries and in the most interesting places, from sewers to the shop floor, the boardroom, the emergency room. I've kind of been a few places in my time. I've been doing this for a few decades now. And everywhere I go, I'm really inspired by leaders who engage all the members of their teams in designing the future of their work. I've seen firsthand the power that those teams have because I really do believe people support what they help to create. So today, my goal is to leave you all with some practical ways to ensure that no one gets left behind in your lean engagements. Ready to engage? I ask that because I want to point out the chat is open. I know for some of these sessions, they're not always open, but I'd like to invite you as we go along to share your ideas with the other participants here. I know there's a fair few of you, but I'd love to hear about and have you share with each other things that you know work or other ideas that you have. Please use the Q&A for questions for me, which we'll leave until the end. I'm not going to be monitoring chat as I work through the presentation portion. So just be aware, I'm not looking. All right, let's get to it. First of all, I'd like to, since I shared a little bit about myself, I'd like to ask a little bit about who we have in our audience. Our administrator is going to launch a poll, and if you'd be so kind as to take part in that poll and let us know a little bit about yourself. The questions or the answers really are up on the screen for you. Go ahead and just select what you do as a part of your regular day job, if you will. All right, let's see some results. So I have most of you, 34% are in a leadership role of some kind, either a lead or a supervisor, a manager, director, or et cetera. We also have some facilitators, consultants, project managers, and trainers in the audience, about 29%. About a quarter of you, 24%, don't fall into a category, and 13% would consider yourselves an independent contributor. I would consider all of you leaders, so I want to start off with that today. I've built this presentation to be applicable to anyone, so it doesn't matter what your role is. I'm going to gear a little bit towards leaders and facilitators as I go through. So I'll try to tailor some of the content, but I want to assure you there will be something for everyone in today's session. I want to start off by talking about psychological safety, which is an important success factor in any engagement. Ensuring that your team has psychological safety with each other. And let me share a working definition of what I mean when I use the phrase psychological safety, so we're all on the same page with that. I'm going to pause for a moment because I have a train coming by. So take a moment maybe to look up from your screen while I let the train pass. Oh, it's like it knew. It didn't blow its horn this time. All right, good. I'm going to reveal about four statements, one at a time. If all members of your work team can say yes to each of these statements, you can rest assured you have the psychological safety to effectively engage everyone on the team. In fact, as I reveal these, I'd like you to just take note of how you would answer each of these items, just on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, and a 5 being strongly agree. Just record your answer for each item, 1 through 5. This should give you an understanding when you think about your team, when you apply this concept, where you are in feeling psychologically safe. Okay, the first is, I feel included. In other words, you're fully a part of the team. You get involved at a level that you feel comfortable with. When problems get solved, you're a part of the solution. For a sense of inclusion to be strong, each member needs to feel valued and treated fairly about things that matter to them, regardless of title or position. How would you rate your current status on I feel included, from 1 to 5, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree? Okay. The next element in considering how psychologically safe a team is I can learn. This really is about not feeling like you need to have all the right answers. How teammates and leaders and even those outside a team respond when someone makes a mistake tells a lot about a team. I worked with a team earlier in my career where the leaders seemed to like to perform a gotcha. They would ask questions of the team. They would wait for someone to respond with an answer they disagreed with, and then would berate the responder in front of the team. That's an extreme example, and it doesn't always have to be this overt. Even subtle things like body language or other subtle responses can impact whether a team member feels like it's safe to learn. You can build psychological safety in this area by ensuring that when something goes sideways or it wasn't exactly what you expected, that the learning's the most important part, maybe even celebrated and not making it about the person. If we learn and grow together, that can help build a bond and grow trust with each other to lean into, I don't know, but let's find out together. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. We'll try something else, right? Did you score yourself on I can learn on a scale of 1 to 5? Okay. Next up, I can contribute. This is similar to feeling included, but also predicated on the valuation of my contribution. If I'm invited to the meetings, but my ideas are never solicited or selected, I'm not going to feel like I can contribute. If I don't feel valued in my role, if my work isn't recognized and valued by the team as an essential part of the work we do, then I don't feel like I'm openly contributing. And also, if I don't have equal access to the things that I need to do my job, this can inhibit my ability to contribute, even information. If some people have the information and others don't, it's hard for everybody to contribute. Where are you on a scale of 1 to 5 on I can contribute? Lastly, our fourth element of psychological safety, I can challenge status quo. This is a difficult one. Think about what would typically stop you from disagreeing on a team, from respectfully saying what needs to be said. What would stop you from challenging the way things currently work? Think about how important this is to a lean or continuous improvement culture. It's critical. Challenging status quo should be expected and it should happen frequently. How do leaders respond when the way that we do it is challenged? How do colleagues react? As humans, we can get super comfortable with status quo and not check in to see if others are as comfortable as we are. I was working on an improvement with a team one time. This was many years ago, and I got really curious why no one on the team was volunteering for an improvement event for a process that was currently pretty broken. So I asked one of the senior team members why that was happening. How come nobody's volunteering? And they told me a story about what happened typically when someone had a fresh idea to try. The other team members would avoid trying it. It was don't rock the boat. Seemed to be that unspoken rule there. Okay, so how did you rate your current ability to challenge status quo on your team from 1 to 5? And then across all 4 of these elements, were you at all 5s? If not, there's work to be done to get to a higher level of psychological safety as a baseline. If you weren't at all 5s, think about a time when you might have been on a team where all 4 of these elements were true for you to a very high degree. That might not be the team you're on now, but think about a time. I imagine that would have been a team where you felt capable of doing anything as a team. It's a fundamental foundation to your engagement strategy. So let's talk through some specific strategies to build engagement on a team. I love it when a team agrees on a nothing about me without me approach. Remember, we just talked through inclusion and contribution as important factors in building psychological safety. I often see broken trust on teams where the team members feel decisions are made that impact their work and they weren't included on the decisions that had impacts to them. Think about the last thing that changed about the processes you do at your work. How did that decision to change get made? Were you involved in the decision on whether or not to do the change? Were you involved in how to learn about the decision or how to modify it for your work? Or was it just passed along to you? One thing I hear too often, frankly, is that leaders will make decisions without having enough information to understand the impacts. So I remember rounding with the CEO of a very large organization one time, and they were visiting the customer service department. They asked a question about a decision that the board was ready to make and asked the team at the huddle, remember, this is frontline customer service staff, asked them what the impact of that decision would be to them. Imagine that, a CEO, before making a decision, wanted to understand what the impact would be to customer service. They're often the last to be considered when something is changing. It was a super thoughtful discussion about how the decision would shift their work, how they would accommodate additional work, and the team left feeling included, considered, and had a heads up about what was heading their way, even if they disagreed. Nothing about me without me. Granted, there's not always time, or sometimes there are confidential items that can't be discussed, but when it can, think about the trust that builds with teams when leaders include those who are impacted in their decisions. Let's look a little bit about how structure for collaboration impacts engagement next. The invitation to collaborate can happen in many different ways, but let's start with structured versus open or unstructured collaboration. I found that there is often a spectrum in lean or continuous improvement cultures related to how teams are expected to work through improving and problem solving together. I've included a graphic here that was produced by Chess Media Group to understand how organizations structured their collaboration. So the first shows 16% of teams who collaborated through structured rules and policies to ensure that employees participated in a common way. This can be through things like naming conventions for files, all the way through rigid structures for problem solving or getting ideas used. The second bar chart shows 37% collaborate through unstructured efforts, where rules and guidelines might be in place, but the group gets to decide on what to do and how to go about it. Notice that organizations that had some of both are most common, 41%. And those with rigid structures are the least common at 16%. So what's the point here? When looking at active engagement, researchers discovered the highest level of collaboration were where there was a healthy balance of both. Some rigid guidelines on areas where more waste and frustration might happen to leave things go too unstructured, like naming conventions or rules about how templates are used. And having a balance between unstructured opportunities where folks can pick what problems they want to solve, not being really forced into an algorithm. Where is your lean or process improvement effort right now? Is it more structured or unstructured? Could you be more thoughtful about having a healthy balance of letting the group decide how to engage and what to engage on, but having some structure in place to help teams move through this process easily? And where could that structure help reduce waste or improve inclusion? I may have some ideas for you later on in this presentation. So be ready to think through how your team could improve the invitation to collaborate. All right, so I'd like to share a general recommendation for everyone. Notice that I put general tips for leaders and others, because really we're all leaders in some way. This is around understanding and recognizing some different types of bias. And I want to ask you to consider putting some structure around how we collaborate so every voice is included and all team members have the ability to contribute. These are not every type of bias that you might come across, but some of the common biases that I see play out in organizations related to their improvement efforts. And I'm going to go one at a time. The first one is response bias, or bias present in the way that we ask questions. Consider the difference between the following questions. Number one, did you consider creating a separate folder for these types of documents? Or number two, what solutions did you consider for document storage? There's bias built into the first question, right? Courtroom lawyers might consider this leading the witness. It's a version of, what about my great idea? Rather than, what great ideas have you considered? There's many versions of response bias. You don't actually believe that, do you? Or wouldn't you rather try X instead of Y? Right? You're in the way you're asking the question, you're guiding that response. Let's talk about anchoring or being overly influenced by the first information received. I've been paying attention in meetings for the past probably decade or so to what idea gets selected when a group is brainstorming. And in my completely unscientific but experiential data, I'd guess about 75% of groups end up landing on the first idea thrown out, especially when that idea comes from a leader, or when that idea has a great deal of conversation about it and how it would or wouldn't work before any subsequent ideas are discussed, if any subsequent ideas are discussed. We often really get hooked on that first idea that we come across. We don't always give everything an equal shot at making it as an option. I've got some solutions for this later on. Next is good old confirmation bias, our tendency to put more value on ideas that already support our current beliefs or ideas that we want to be true, and less value or even disregarding those ideas which contradict beliefs we already hold or ideas we don't want to be true. This one's a really hard bias to identify in oneself because it's centered on our assumptions and beliefs, sometimes deeply held beliefs. For example, if I believe collaboration takes too long and delays decisions, am I likely to lean into engagement strategies? If I believe that the answer to how to best fix a broken process and I have the answer, am I really listening to other ideas or hearing other root causes that disconfirm my beliefs? Probably not. The false consensus effect is another cognitive bias. So it's seeing your own opinions as more common than they really are. Team members who fail to check in on how others really feel are often surprised when they learn later on that others don't hold the same ideas that they do. In fact, I attended a meeting very recently where a question was posed to the team about whether the project was going well. And someone spoke up with their perspective that it was delayed because of the vendor. Another person told a story about how that vendor is always behind, and that lasted for about 2 to 3 minutes. And then the leader said, "So let's move forward with asking the vendor to get caught up by the end of the month." There were 15 people in that meeting. So as an outsider, I posed, I wonder if there are other reasons for the delay. And that opened 4 or 5 other people who disagreed about the vendor being a cause and brought up several other factors that might need addressing. Now, it may have been confirmation bias on the leader's part to begin with, but the fact that they were willing to move on and take action without hearing or asking for other perspectives seems to have been a false consensus effect. And honestly, that isn't even that rare of an occurrence. This happens all the time. I'm also including the IKEA effect as a common bias. And no, I'm not making this one up. That's really what it's called. That's putting a higher value on things that you've personally worked on. And it's easy to see why that's a bias. In fact, it's the name of this session. People support what they help create. One time I worked as a part of a team that was prototyping building designs, and we had the team split into 5 smaller teams, and each came up with a different design. After a design was chosen, this was several days later after we'd worked through a lot of detail to derive the design, there were folks that were visibly upset and who kept referencing their models. They had a hard time letting go of the design that their team came up with. And I attribute much of that to the IKEA effect. They'd worked hard enough to design their favorite and were struggling to see any other design as higher value. There's other biases that show up, of course. I strongly recommend spending time recognizing these common biases, both in yourself and maybe in your team. Pay attention to where these creep into your routines on your team. Recognizing the bias is the first step to help you avoid situations where you're encouraging these biases. I'm going to be giving some different ways to do this, to set up some counters to these biases a little bit later in the presentation. But right now, I'd like to give you just a few seconds to record for yourself which bias you'd like to have a solution for, and then see if we can find some future recommendations a little bit later. So go ahead and pick one. All right. This is a good time to give one more tip that helps anyone become better at encouraging collaboration. One of the best ways to help someone feel included and contribute is by asking good questions. Toyota believes in this so strongly that they promote in a T. And by that, they mean in order to become a leader after someone has progressed into an expert in one area, they're promoted to a different team where they are not an expert. So they have to ask good questions, questions they don't know the answer to. Here in the US, we typically look for technical expertise in order to promote. And it can be really hard for a leader to ask questions of a team when they have a high level of technical expertise and already know the right answer. I'm putting right answer in quotes, right? Because I also think it's true that because work changes, systems change, and sometimes our technical expertise is no longer valid once we've taken on a new role. And asking good questions becomes really important to the leader in understanding what their team is thinking. I do have a recommendation on a good, surprisingly short read, Humble Inquiry by Edgar and Peter Stein, if you're interested in building up your capability to ask good questions. Before I get into some specific solutions for meetings, I want to talk about decision-making and consensus in decision-making, otherwise known as disagree and commit. The problem with consensus, which I'm defining as I can agree to support this decision, even though I disagree because I felt heard. And some of you may have that as a rule right now that you make decisions by consensus. But the problem is it sounds great, but all too often it puts pressure on those who don't agree with the majority to come around. There's power in disagreeing and saying, I disagree and here's why. However, those who frequently find themselves in disagreement can feel ostracized from the group after a while. If there's a pattern of groupthink or other dysfunctional dynamics at play, it can even lead to further exclusion. So I often advocate for trying multiple ways when a group can't agree. Once I was working with a group of dermatologists who couldn't agree on what picture of the human body to give to their patients to have them circle areas of concern on. And after 3 dermatologists became very convinced each of them were squarely in the right with their design, we stopped discussion, asked the trio to brainstorm what criteria we should use to judge the best, and then sent them off to trial using all 3 in their practices for half a day each. When we got to the end of the trial, one was clearly the winner based on the criteria all 3 had given, and we avoided a stalemate. I do always recommend starting with the question, how will we decide, as an important first step to acknowledging a commitment to ensuring that we end on a note where everyone feels appreciated for their contribution. All right, let's talk strategies. First, I want to talk about meetings to collaborate on problem solving. And I'll begin with some strategies for getting participation and input in in-person meetings. Then I'm going to move to hybrid, then virtual, and then some non-meeting situations. So I've chosen to break out into these 3 categories of meetings because I think each have some different and unique engagement strategies. So first, let's talk about in-person meetings. Remember, we want people to challenge status quo. That was a part of our psychological safety. So to reinforce expectations for challenging status quo, I've got a few strategies for you. The first can be used by anyone in any meeting and is one of my favorite ways to disagree, by using yes and, which comes out of the world of improvisation. And here's how it works. Think about the difference in a meeting when someone says, I've seen our printer running out of paper more frequently, and I think we should order paper every 2 weeks instead of every 4 weeks. And another colleague says, I don't think that's the problem at all. I see someone from the 4th floor using our printer, and we should just tell them to stop. How do you suspect the first contributor may feel? Imagine if instead the second colleague had simply said, yes, and there are also people who are using our printer from another floor. Could that also be contributing to the problem? It's a different way to acknowledge others' contribution, even if we disagree or want to offer an alternative. Think about how this might help others contribute and feel included. It's a simple change that makes a big difference. Next, how about using prototyping and trying different things to get to a solution? I'm so surprised at the number of times a team will try one option and go all in on one solution instead of prototyping several and seeing what works best. I just gave you all an example of the dermatologist trying different pictures of a human body, but this applies to so many other worlds. I led a process improvement workshop for a team that was experiencing a lot of handoffs and delays in getting a change documented in their system. And I asked each of the 15 members of the team to go away and design their own dream future state. And when they came back a week later, they had 15 different models to consider. They prototyped 3 and they tried each of them for a week and got data to suggest which one was better than the other 2 and their status quo. By getting folks to try different things, it's a helpful way to engage many minds. Another fun way to get individual through their own biases and what should be tried is 7 ways. It's very simple, very effective. So the prompt is, what are 7 ways to solve our problem? I want everyone to draw on a sticky note 7 different ways we could solve for this issue. After the first 2 or 3, now you're really tapping into creativity. If you want a starter exercise to get folks having fun and getting creative, start with drawing on a whiteboard, a boat floating on waves, and a bowling ball at the bottom of water. Hand out sticky notes and felt pens and ask everyone to come up with at least 7 ways to get the bowling ball into the boat. 1 idea per sticky note. It's super easy for the first 2 or 3. People usually say, oh, a net or a fishing pole, but then it gets harder and harder to come up with number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. Eventually they get really creative and some of those ideas are the best. It's a great warm up. And then finally, brainstorming. Sorry, there's the train. Brainstorming, but doing it 1 idea at a time. So asking for 1 idea from a person and rotating all the way through 1 idea at a time until all ideas are represented. And it gets to some of those biases we discussed earlier. Or how about using a liberating structure? For those of you not familiar, go ahead and Google liberating structures. It's a whole list of ideas for facilitators or meeting leaders to help get maximum input and work through some important questions. They give you a facilitator guide for how to set up each activity. And this one is one of my favorites for dismantling some dysfunction on a team and also getting a lot of ideas and helping to sort through and present some of the best. It values introverted thinkers and extroverted processors equally, which I love. And it goes like this. So for the 1 in 1, 2, 4 all, you ask each person to make their own list. So given the prompt, which might be, what are some of the causes of our problem? Or what would you like to try? Everyone makes their own list. That lets people think about their own ideas. It also lets those who need to think before speaking or listening do so. Then ask them to get into a twosome and compare ideas. They can take their favorites or ones they agree on, or even add to their list as they hear the other person's list. Then each twosome gets into a foursome and compares and decides on their top 2 or 3. Then it's a report out to the all, where we're getting 2 or 3 ideas per foursome. It's a great way to get a lot of ideas quickly and value everyone's contribution along the way. In fact, once it's past the twosome, nobody really knows whose idea was whose anymore. And now we're evaluating based on the merit of an idea and not whose idea it is. All right, let's talk about keeping teams on track. So this picture is literally a team on a track and not exactly what I meant, but also sort of what I meant. How do you keep teams on track in a face-to-face meeting? Have you ever had someone run across the lanes or even exit the track during a meeting? I've had a couple teams that have engaged all team members to address when the team's going down a rabbit hole. One team uses an actual stuffed rabbit that they pull out and toss over if someone's going off track or down a rabbit hole, which allows the team to address whether they want to continue on a tangent or bring the group back to their purpose. Another team uses pictures of squirrels that they pass out to everyone. Everyone gets a picture of a squirrel. And at any time, they can choose to raise their squirrel to question if the group has started to squirrel or go off track. By giving anyone and everyone the ability to call it out, and by making it a little fun, it might sound goofy, but we distribute the responsibility of anyone on the team keeping the group on topic. Think about a time when you've been in a meeting and it was going off topic. Wouldn't it have maybe been easier to question if you'd had a fun, inclusive way to do so, and it was a part of the expectations that we all keep each other on track? Let's talk about hybrid meetings. Maybe one of my least favorite. I'm still learning how to do this well. So hybrid is where some participants are calling in or working remotely, and some part of the team is in a conference room together. This one's hard to facilitate and ensure that everyone feels like an equal participant. but there are some things that you can do to ensure that everyone is engaged. I'm going to give you one suggestion, and then any of the hacks I have for fully virtual meetings should work. And this is my suggestion. One face, one screen, meaning those in the room all bring their own laptop or go fully remote. Do what you can to equalize those who are in the room. Be sure to use e-tools like the raised hand queue in the meeting software that you're using for turn taking. It is terribly isolating to be on the screen and be forgotten until maybe at the end someone says, any of you on the screen have something to add? If you do only have one remote participant, this might work. Make sure they're included as you go around the room, solicit their input as you would anyone else's, but make sure the technology in the room allows those who are remote to know who's speaking, if it's not already obvious. Otherwise, carefully consider going fully virtual. Virtual meetings have become more the norm and have created ways to be inclusive. And I know they've created even more new ways to become less connected. I have some solutions that work for both virtual as well as hybrid meetings to ensure engagement. Just as you're experiencing now, there's often nothing to do other than listen and watch in a virtual meeting. So let's try something to do that. I'm looking at my time and I don't know that we have time to do this in the room and we have so many people. I want to tell you how this works and then maybe have you explore in one of your team meetings. This is one of my favorite ways to ensure that everyone is engaged. It's by using the chat in a non-traditional way. This is how a waterfall chat works. So you give a prompt. You ask everyone to type their response in the chat box, but do not hit enter. So you maybe ask them, what ideas do you have about X? Have them type it into the chat, but not hit enter. And then you give a command to say, okay, now we're all going to hit enter at once. 3, 2, 1, and go. Now I've done my own thinking, and now we can take a few minutes to explore what are other people thinking too? What common themes do we have? If you asked for ideas for solutions to a common problem, you might be able to talk through some of the common ones or ask the team to ask questions of anyone who had a unique idea. That's an interesting way to do that as well. So many options, and it values those introverted thinkers as well as external processors. And it required some action to keep folks engaged. Consider using your technology. So a virtual whiteboard, this is a feature I've come to really appreciate, is the voting feature. This one is what it looks like on Miro, but others have this feature as well. In a room, we might do dot voting, where we have ideas at the front of the room. We ask folks to select their top 3 and maybe put a dot on it. Unfortunately, there's often some bias built in with that because we can see how a leader is voting, or it looks like my idea won't win, so I'm going to pick something else that I might have the ability to influence. This allows everyone to vote without knowing how others are voting and allows us to have some conversations where we might be aligned or we might have divergence of opinion. I talked a little bit earlier about using the raised hand queue. This may be another one of my favorite tools because it's often hard for me in the room as a facilitator to know who raised their hand first. So it takes the guesswork out of it and can be an equalizer that takes the mystery out of who wants to share next. All right, out of meetings and in the moment. I know I've talked a lot about meetings, but I know we have folks with us who are in the field or who, when we aren't in meetings, we might need some different methods to increase engagement. So let's talk about ideas in the moment. First, consider using the coaching kata in the field. For those unfamiliar with coaching kata, it's a routine of 5 questions to help reinforce problem-solving methodologies. I often use these questions or variations of them when I'm in the field learning about what's happening. So one time a leader I was coaching was visiting a team huddle, and the team was talking about a sewer site that had recently been handed over from the build team to the maintenance team. The maintenance team was talking through all the punch list items that hadn't been completed and were now theirs to own, initially asking the leader to take care of the remaining items. The leader walked them through these questions, and by the end of the discussion, had a few steps the team could own and one the leader needed to own. It was a great example of working through a problem together and helping the team get organized around defining problems better, understanding barriers, and getting the team set up for action. Another strategy is to ensure that everyone is included in continuous improvement is engaging in Gemba walks. Go to the actual place where the work happens and talk to the people doing the work. One team I worked with recently had several people who all did the same task, but for different customers. And they took an afternoon to walk over to each person's desk and have them show how they did the task. Same system, same task, everybody was doing it differently. And the whole team could understand the different ways the same task could be accomplished. And they were able to take some best practices away. No one had to be convinced or talked into anything. They could see what worked better, and they were motivated to ask each other questions. And we got feedback afterwards that the team members started making going to Gemba a part of their regular meetings so they could continue to learn and work through problems together. So not always can all the same people be together at the same time. So when you need to engage folks asynchronously at, like when you have multiple shifts, for example, one time when working in a hospital, the day shift staff reorganized the supply room to improve the flow and create a better system for the team, only to come back the next day and find everyone had put things back where it was originally. And it happened again before someone from day shift showed up to talk to the night shift about why they moved everything back, and noticed that the nurses who were on night shift happened to be shorter and couldn't reach some of the more common night shift needs that the day shift had put up on the top shelf. Remember, the nothing about me without me phrase, sometimes we need to account for asynchronous improvement and involving teams across multiple times to get the best result. Here's an example of another nursing team that was down the hall from the other one, getting people's input on problem solving because they had 3 shifts. Many people worked 3 12s or 4 10s, but they took time to get people's opinion every step of the way when solving the problem. So engaging people visually and talking about the same thing until everybody had a chance to give input. I've recently started scheduling process improvement workshops with days and times in between the workshop activities to allow that asynchronicity to happen. So folks can think about what they want to bring back, ask questions of other teammates, or gather data over time. Okay, finally, there are also many ways to make sure that you're gathering input from teams and helping them to get to a decision, using online tools that give quick polls or surveys that allow folks to weigh in on what they would like to see happen, for example, using methods like fist to 5 to look across a room and see how strongly people feel and avoid that false consensus bias, right? So you simply ask folks to put their hand up with a 0 or a fist all the way through 5 on how bought in they are on something or how they feel about something. I had a team that used tick marks that you'll see here on a spectrum to have folks select a team vision from several options, asking things like, put your mark from 0 to 5 on how proud this vision would make you feel, or how connected to your work is this vision statement, and I'll let them do that over time. Think about ways to put quick check-ins on how the team is thinking or feeling throughout the improvement work that you do, and you'll find folks engage in new ways, maybe even feeling a little safer to engage. All right, we're going to get going on Q&A now, but I asked you earlier to record a bias that you might like to get some ideas for. And then I went through a lot of different strategies for that. But I'd like you to type out for yourself or write down, or however you want to record, what's one thing from today that you're committing to try. It can be something simple. knowing that you'll have a greater chance of remembering what you'd like to try if you've generated the thought for yourself. I'm going to give you a moment to do this before we move into Q&A. While my administrators get ready for Q&A. Maybe you have a question on something you'd like to try, and now would be a good time to put that in Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and start my video again. And I'm ready for Q&A. What do we got in there, Sam?
All right, great. Thank you so far. This has been wonderful. It looks like Tiffany asks, what do you do when some of the strategies backfire? So for example, suggesting the squirrel paddle idea in a meeting. You give everyone the squirrel paddle and set the expectation. However, the meeting still gets off track, including the leader, and even those trying to use the squirrel paddle to try to get the meeting back on track. They're ignored. What do you do then?
So I'm going to answer in my traditional lean sense is try something else. I also want to say each of the teams created, so the rabbit idea or the squirrel idea, the teams created those. So I wasn't trying to sell an idea. We were just noticing that that was a problem the team wanted to solve, that people were off track, and we engaged them in thinking about, well, what could you do? What would be a way that we could encourage any of us to call it out safely? And that's what each of the teams designed. When an idea backfires, I'm pretty direct, and I'll just call it out and say, hey, this isn't working. What else should we try? And again, as long as the team is engaged in solving the problem, I usually find that they're pretty intentional about wanting to do it differently. That doesn't mean everything goes 100% all the time.
Right. Flexibility is key in all of this, right? Jesse's wondering if you can explain response bias again.
Okay. Response bias. Let me run back to that. I'm going to bring it back up. So response bias, I'm going back in time. Response bias is about how you ask a question, right? So you're biasing the response in the question. So the example that I gave might be suggesting what the solution is. Have you tried insert my great idea here, right? This will frequently happen as I'm asking leaders that are new to asking questions, maybe leaders that are used to telling and not asking. And that usually is the first form of question that they do, is instead of, I think you should do X, they'll ask it in the form of a question. Have you tried X? Which is, you're building the response bias. The answer then is either yes or no. And it really is a different thing than what have you tried? What have you considered, right? So think about how to ask a question that doesn't bias the response. It's not building maybe the answer in.
Excellent.
Thank you for bringing that one back up.
Yeah, and so we've got a few more minutes, just trying to be mindful of time. So Caitlin asks, what are some tips neurodivergent persons may use to encourage themselves to be more confident when giving contributions and fulfilling their psychological safety?
Oh, that's a very good one. I usually find being honest and open about what it is that you need on a team in order to feel like you can respectfully say what needs to be said. So asking for feedback if you're comfortable, or really letting folks know what is it that you need. I work with a team that frequently starts every meeting by establishing a safety net, by asking that question and saying, what is it that each of us need in order to respectfully say what needs to be said? And that might be a great way to open up that question and let people be honest about what I really need. I usually find folks who are introverted will say, I need some time to think about my answer. And I have had some neurodivergent folks say, things that I say don't always come out right the first way that I say them. And I appreciate it when somebody asks me, what do I mean? Instead of making some assumptions about what that might be. So again, putting that structure in place and really allowing for that to happen. We don't always know with something like neurodivergence, that's a hidden something that's hidden, we wouldn't obviously know necessarily that something that we might need to have a countermeasure in place. So being able to open it up to everybody to talk about what they need from the group, especially if there's some risk in what we're going to be talking about. I love that idea.
Yes, yes. So, in along the same lines, Jeremy asked, "What tools do you use to create psychological safety when you're in a racially diverse team with imbalances of power?"
Ooh, we got 4 minutes and you're gonna
Yeah,
drop one on
I
me.
know. It's a big
That
one.
that might be my session for next year. That's a fantastic question. I really do think, and I just gave you a tool that I think is really important to getting folks talking about, but I want to talk about how leaders set this up from the very beginning, around understanding their own bias and being able to set up what are the norms, what's going to be allowed to be said. There's just so much in this field. I want to talk about bias, I want to talk about microaggressions, I want to talk about a lot of things, and I don't know that I can actually do that question justice in just 3 minutes. I would also invite, I've got my email address. I would love to be able to share more ideas and hear other folks' ideas on that topic in particular. I think that's something that we all could be much better at. This isn't easy. And I do find that helping folks come up with some cultural norms of what is and isn't okay, it is a start.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to give a nod real quick. We've got another question in here from Stephen asking for more information. He's curious, how does the night shift in a 24-hour organization really understand the problem definition and getting in sync with that day shift? So I'm seeing a couple of different ideas for your session next year. You've got a lot of questions and interest.
That's fantastic. I think you have to be really intentional. It is so easy for alternative shifts to get forgotten. Folks tend to center on day shift. And frankly, some of the solutions that work for days don't always work with nights. I find in hospitals in particular, there's different industries, but in hospitals in particular, they have patients who are sleeping very much of the night. And sometimes that doesn't work the same way that daytime, where they're doing meals and other things. And so involving everybody and understanding whatever problem you're trying to solve from every point of view and taking your time with it so that other folks can be included. It also frequently is the night shift who needs to accommodate day shift. We have a lot of Washington State folks here, so I don't know that this is a problem, but I work with some global companies where we tend to focus on US standard time zones and not always include those who are in Europe who are 9 hours ahead, or the folks who are in Asia who sometimes have to get up in the middle of the night to attend a problem solving meeting. So being really thoughtful and intentional how we're going to engage everyone, I think, is very critical.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone who engaged today, stuck it out with us. I know it's harder in the afternoon, and I think, Jennifer, we live close because my train's going at the same time. So there will be, yeah, yeah. There will be a survey coming up at the end of the session. Please do take some time to fill that out for us. We want to continuously improve and share that around. And I want to say thank you to Michelle and Janine for providing that ASL interpretation today. Remember, revisit the sessions you watched live, watch the sessions you may have missed, download copies of the presenter materials. I saw a lot of questions about that. We do have that available on the website, and there are still 2 more days of the conference this year. So make sure to sign up for additional sessions if you can, and if not, just hit that website and we'll have all of that ready for you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. Very glad to have you here. Can't wait for your sessions next year. I'm hearing there might be a couple in the works, so I'm going to hold you to that.